of OddPodsMedia and ASAP All Sports All Plays Network. Hello and welcome to Big Ten Plus 4. We bring you college sports with a Midwest perspective. We are blue collar and blue blood, and I know it's a little different because I'm making the intro today. Usually my co-host Dalton Shetler is the one doing all of the introductions because he's just that much better than me at it. But he's on vacation this week, and we were going to take the week off. But so much has happened. I gotta fill in for Dalton. We have Tony Hollandsworth from ASAP Network, All Sports All Plays Network. Tony, thanks so much for filling in for Dalton this week.
No, I appreciate it. Thank y'all for having me. I was super excited when Freddie said that you guys were coming to All Sports All Plays. I was like, oh my gosh, they cover pretty much college almost all the time.
Yeah.
I feel like college doesn't get as much love as it used to. And especially the Big Ten. Like, I'm a Midwest kid. I've been a Midwest kid pretty much my entire life. I was like, oh, no, I'm going to love this show. I'm going to love everything that this show does. So it was like, I was super excited when you were like, hey, can you fill in? I was like, 100%. You tell me a time of the day, I'll make it work.
Yeah. Well, and we do record before we actually stream and put out our show. So we're kind of delayed, and there are some times that we miss some things on our show. And this week was definitely one of those. Like I said, we were going to do a week off, and we recorded last Wednesday. And Thursday, it all came down and just pouring down the mountain. The Big Ten is adding, and this is no shock to anybody now, but the Big Ten is adding Southern Cal and UCLA to the Big Ten, which a lot of people don't see the validity behind it, but we're going to talk about, just kind of the ins and outs of the whole thing. And it was huge because in 2024, Tony, is when they're doing it. Like, they fast tracked this. Oklahoma and Texas are moving to the SEC, but they took like a 3-year process. USC and UCLA just said, we're going as soon as possible. 2024, it's happening.
Yeah. And there's a few people even looked at that, because if you look at just a few weeks before this, Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU, which BYU it didn't affect as much because they're independent. They could leave anytime they want.
Right.
Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston all went ahead and bought out their contracts with the AAC and are joining the Big 12 in 2024 as well. So you're going to have a 16-team Big 12 there for a little bit. But no, you're exactly right. The fact that USC and UCLA both joined, it is kind of shocking to, I would say, a lot of older college fans, or people that are more, fans of the traditional, because there's always been this unspoken, geographic line between all of the conferences. When you think of USC and UCLA, you immediately think of it's only Pac-12 football, and then pretty much everything past the Colorado Rockies is Pac-12 for the most part.
Right.
And now that's completely broken with, now the Big Ten has literally everything coast to coast now.
And I think it's one of those that people were shocked that the Big Ten went to Rutgers and Maryland. Mm-hmm. Now, I personally thought they should have, instead of Rutgers, went after UConn at the time. But at the same time, they wanted the New York City market. So I get it. I get it to a point for that aspect. For quality, they should have went with UConn, I think. I mean, because in the past few years, UConn football and Rutgers football have been pretty much the same thing, just in different uniforms, Mm-hmm. And but the basketball aspect is what I was thinking on that one is what does Rutgers bring over UConn? And I didn't see anything other than the New York City market. That's the only reason I could see why they did it. So it made less sense. Honestly, Tony, if I think about it, it makes less sense for Rutgers to be in the Big Ten than it does USC, just from the historic value that USC has provided to the Big Ten or with Big Ten teams.
Mhm. Oh no, 100%. And if you look a few years ago, because I happened to read an article when all this came out, apparently the Big Ten was actually going after UNC and Virginia, if I remember correctly,
Wow.
at the time that they were going after Rutgers and Maryland. And I guess they tried to coerce UNC and Virginia. They said, no, we're good. And then that's how they ended up with Maryland and Rutgers. But like you said, looking at it today, you're still right. It's one of those, it doesn't really fit. Rutgers doesn't have like a rich history of, very, traditionally good football programs, traditionally good basketball programs. Now, I will say this year, Rutgers kind of shocked me because, I watched a lot of, I don't know if you happen to watch a lot of Rutgers basketball games at all.
I watched a lot more this year than I have ever watched in the past.
And they were fairly good. Like a lot of teams that were supposed to, be just rolling over them. Rutgers came to play and they were very good matchups. Like, I watched a few with Michigan State and I was like, wow, the Rutgers of all teams.
Right. I went on the record multiple times saying that Rutgers should have had a bye in the tournament compared to Michigan. Like that's how strongly I felt about Rutgers seasons. I mean, I'm a Purdue fan.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they beat Purdue when Purdue was like 3 days into their number one ranking in the country on a half court shot. Now Purdue should have just blown them out or, not been in that position. But that to me said, you know what, they're a legit team to put up some threats. And, they beat Wisconsin on the road. They beat, I believe it was Iowa. They beat 3 straight ranked teams in a row. And that was on top of the Purdue win. So yeah, Rutgers this year actually finally validated, if there was any time that they validated their Big Ten membership, it was this year in basketball.
Yeah. And really even because Maryland is the same way. And I think Maryland did it a few years ago, actually. They did it in 2017 and 2018. So I don't know if you happen to remember. Both of them, ironically enough, was the beginning of the college football season. They faced Texas. The first time it was in Texas. Texas was ranked. Maryland was not. Maryland shocked everybody, ended up coming back and winning that game in Texas. And then the very next year, they flipped it. They had Texas come to Maryland. Both teams were ranked at that point, but I know Maryland was only ranked, I think, 24, 25, or very low 20s in the AP rankings, and then shocked Texas again by beating them. So, Maryland was able to recruit Tua Tagovailoa's brother out of Alabama to be their starting quarterback. So Maryland has tried to make a little bit of the waves as far as the college football world goes. Maryland basketball, I watched a few of their matchups again against Michigan State. They weren't terrible. They brought Michigan State down to the wire a couple times. But
it took a last second shot for Michigan State to beat them in College Park.
Yeah, it did. And I watched that entire game. I was really surprised. And even the turnout of fans in Maryland, because being stationed there, I did not see a whole lot of Maryland fans ever. I saw one Maryland fan when I was up in Detroit for a couple of months. I was like, oh my goodness, I know you guys exist, but I only ever see you on TV. I'm really surprised to see one of you in person.
I thought it was just like, CGI. They had like 200 fans and they just into the stands. So yeah, to kind of get back to the UCLA and USC thing, I didn't hear any sort of information on this until Thursday morning when I got an alert on ESPN or on the app, and it says UCLA USC considering or finding validity. They were exploring the move. By the afternoon, it was, hey, this is a done deal. We're just waiting on the press conference. And then that night, I mean, did you hear anything other? I honestly, I wasn't looking for any information. So when I got just that message, it was, holy crap. And then I jump on and look, and the more I look, it's like, oh, this is done. It's just waiting to be announced. Yeah, was there? am I missing something? Was there smoke before the fire, or was it like instantaneous, just like combustion?
I think it was just instantaneous combustion because I was looking at it, and of course, as more of this came out, you started to see more and more, verified and trustworthy sources start to come out and say,
Right.
"Hey, this apparently has." They said this apparently had been in works for months. But I will give USC and UCLA's public relations team all the credit in the world because they were able to keep this under wraps, like you said, for months potentially. And there's also a source that said apparently this was all Fox driven, because as we know, the TV network deals are coming up for the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and I believe the Big 12 as well. And ESPN already locked down the SEC. So Fox was really pushing this, and this has been something that's been a pain for college for a while now. It's been 7 years they've had an attendance drop and a viewership drop in
Mhm.
college football. So, this kind of does what I believe college needs. If you're a college football fan, it gives you more of a revamping because now you're going to have bigger names in bigger games, and you're going to have more to choose from as far as watching a lot of these. If we look at the first kickoff of the coming season, the first 2 weeks, you've got three really big games that you're going to want to watch as far as a national light. You have Oregon versus Georgia. You have Notre Dame versus Ohio State in the first week. And then the week 2, you just really have the big game is Alabama versus Texas. And that's about it. So, and USC and UCLA are actually going to double their profits joining the Big Ten because they were only getting about $30 million a year out of the Pac-12. Now they're going to get about 70, 80, even on the lower end
Right.
of this. So, it's shocking, and a lot of mixed feelings about it. A lot of mixed feelings about it.
Well, we'll get to that just down the road a little bit. But one thing I did remember was in that article that ESPN broke that USC and UCLA were even talking about this, was there was a comment to maybe the tweet I saw right after that. It said, "This is why the Big Ten closed their commissioner or their AD meeting. They made it a private meeting. They went because normally it's open and it's like streamed or whatever, but this is why they had a luncheon or something and they closed it off. It was because they were finalizing that. If there was any smoke, I think that was it.
Oh, yeah.
Like they kept it close to their hip the whole time for months until that meeting to finalize the deal, basically. And then they had to close it. And it made people wonder why, because no news had come out that they were even talking expansion.
Well, not only that, but it makes it even more surprising because, again, when we first heard about the Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, just shortly after the commissioners for the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 all came out and basically said, we're going to make a formal alliance against the SEC in this powerhouse. And then with this move, it's like, yeah, they're just that whole, and we've even seen a few of them. The Pac-12 commissioner came out and said, yeah, now you can't trust anybody.
Well, and he had no clue.
Yeah,
that was the kicker is he had no clue. Like this was about as covert operation as you can get, because like the commissioner of the conference that these two teams left didn't even know that it was happening.
Yeah.
And that to me blows my mind that something major like that can take place with somebody in such a high position having zero idea that it was happening. Now, is he blowing smoke and he knew it was coming, but he knew there was nothing they could do to keep him? Maybe, but the fact that he's going on the record of, I was blindsided by this, you can't trust anybody now.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think he probably had an idea because it's even been mentioned USC and UCLA haven't been happy in the Pac-12 for a few years now.
They were unhappy with the TV deal. Hugely disappointed with it.
Yeah, so it's like he probably had to know that if there was ever a potential for them to get out, that they were probably going to look for it. Now, did he probably expect Big Ten? No. But to be honest with you, even if I was sitting there, okay, where do I think they're going to go? The Big Ten was going to be the last place I ever figured, USC and UCLA to go to that even remotely made sense.
Well, honestly, I thought maybe it would be one of those that some of the lesser teams from the Big 12 or the Pac-12, might move along. But USC and UCLA and Oregon would all be those cornerstones, the rock solid foundation of the conference, and they would add some other schools in, and still make it the Pac-12, or the Pac whatever number you want to add to it, because they're the only conference that's adjusted their totals in their name. The Big Ten's had more than 10 teams for going on 30 years plus almost. So I forgot where I was going with that, Tony. So it was such a surprise that I texted Dalton, was like, is this really happening? And he said that dude is, because it was Jeff. I don't. I'd have to look it up on who it was, but it was a tweet. He goes, "That dude's for real, and he knows his stuff." And I said, "So this is happening?" And he did some more digging, and he broke it to me that it was happening. Like I saw the news that it was coming. But Dalton did some digging and got back with me. He says, "Yeah, from what I'm finding, it's a happening. It's inevitable. Expect a presser within 24 hours to make it finalized." He said, "Other than that, it's just kind of just done. I mean, there's nothing else to work out. There's an agreement. It's happening." And I'm like, wow, this is shocking to say the least. I mean, shocking to say the least. So, all right, well, let's move to the second quarter. I didn't hear it. Did you?
Oh yeah, I heard it.
Okay. Well, I'm operating on a different browser today, and so like some of the audio isn't coming through to me, but yet I see that it's working. So we're moving to the second quarter, and we're kind of keeping on. We're going to keep on this move throughout the whole show, with the exception of maybe headlines. I don't know where your headline went, but we might be away from the USC UCLA deal. Was this the right move? Like, were these the two teams that should have been added to the Big Ten now? And and let me pose this: if you say no, that's okay, but who would you replace them with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is, but I noticed that the Big Ten is now working to grab who I think they initially wanted first off. And
I think it's golden that you're thinking that way.
Exactly. It's golden and it's green.
Yeah.
And it's
lucky,
100%
lucky, if you will.
Right. And yeah, it's Notre Dame, and they're trying to coerce Notre Dame right now. I guess Notre Dame currently is the last little bit of hope for, I guess college football normalcy is, even if we have, two mega super conferences, Notre Dame are they still going to be independent and make their own schedule, or what are they going to do? But I think
with Notre Dame, I think you're right. I think they wanted Notre Dame, because no matter how irrelevant you think Notre Dame might be, or how poorly they've performed at certain times, don't get me wrong, they've been in the college playoff recently. They're normally 9, 8, 9, 10, maybe even 11 wins. So I mean, for me as a Purdue fan, I'm like, geez, I'll take 8, 9, 10, doesn't matter, all three of those, any of those. But like they're still not considered as one of they're still traditionally a powerhouse, but right now they're still kind of outside on the fringe. But I still think they're the linchpin of, like you said, they come out and go into a conference, the whole house of cards is going down, and I think it's an inevitability no matter which way Notre Dame goes. But I think they're signing their own death certificate if they say, yeah, we're staying independent, because I think we're headed towards, and we'll get to what we see college football looking like down the road after halftime. But I could see them suffering wildly if they think that, you know what, we can handle this on our own. And but yeah, I mean, Oregon and from what I've seen from multiple sources, so this isn't just one person and I just happened to find it. Oregon's waiting on Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Washington's waiting on Oregon. But I honestly, I think if not Notre Dame, these two were the obvious choices. They're the two biggest teams, I'm not saying currently, they're the two biggest historically valuable teams from the Pac-12, period. Like you go basketball, you've got UCLA that, they have the most national titles. They're great. Their icon of a coach played at Purdue. So like there's the connection to the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. So there is some value to the UCLA moving to the Big Ten. Now you can develop other, rivalries and things. Now it's hard to be geographically rivaled to a team in LA when you're in Evanston, Illinois. Yes. But you get what I'm saying. You can develop those, over the course of time. There are Big Ten teams that have rivalries with USC because of their trips to the Rose Bowl. Mm-hmm. So these two teams historically, I think, made sense. If not Notre Dame, these two made absolute sense.
Oh, yeah. And I think especially, like you said, and I was thinking about that last night. I think the Big Ten did this in a very smart way because they didn't just grab, football powerhouse schools. They grabbed schools that, like you said, are rich in history with both, as far as a good football program and an up and coming football program. Once again, they went and got USC. USC went out and poached Lincoln Riley, of all coaches, and brought a lot of his recruits with him. So that kind of shocked everybody. And now in the football world, USC is more than likely going to be a legit contender once again. And then, like you said, with basketball, you were able to bring in, UCLA, who, most national titles, Bob Wooten, the head coach that helped get them all of those titles. So yeah, I think they did it really smart as far as getting those two. And like I said, Notre Dame would have probably been the biggest. Another name I could throw out there that I don't think would be as big of a nationally recognized name, but it would create a lot of, to me, an interesting matchup as far as, the Big Ten is best known for their interstate rivalries. Why not get a Cincinnati, especially as up and coming as they've been, against an Ohio State? I feel like that would have been a really good move.
Yeah, and I'm being told that my internet is being slow, so I apologize if it's gotten better, but it's still. But anyways, I'm gonna power through it. Oh, it went away, so that must mean we have an okay connection now. I wonder if it's not the big name, it's not that sexy name like you just said, but you're right. Plus it's in the geographical realm of what the Big Ten is, obviously, for historically geographic. Now Notre Dame covers both of those aspects. Yes. The national recognition and that geographical location. But I think geography it's such a small world anymore. You can see what's going on in London right now. Mm-hmm. Whereas it used to take, a couple of weeks for information to come back, or come across. So I think geographical location, other than the traveling for the teams to USC and UCLA, doesn't mean much, or UCLA over to the rest of the Big Ten. It doesn't mean much. And think about the novelty for the first 4 to 5 years when they're making their first appearance. Oh my gosh, USC's coming to play Northwestern. They're having it at Soldier Field. Oh, yeah. And they're packing it. Mm-hmm. Think about that first Big Ten, and I'm jumping ahead just a touch, assuming that Notre Dame is going to join the Big Ten. Yeah. Think about that first USC Notre Dame game inside conference.
Oh, yeah.
It will rival, and I'm not saying it is equal to, but it will rival Michigan, Ohio State. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
That style. And you will see it Thanksgiving weekend, just like, or maybe the week before Michigan, Ohio State. It will happen if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten shortly down the road. That's what the last question before we head to halftime is, how does this stack the Big Ten with the SEC that will exist after Texas and Oklahoma move? Does this keep them on par and competitive at the level of this is one of these two could be argued as the best conference?
Yeah, I think it definitely keeps them in contention because the SEC basically did the same thing. They looked at the entire college football landscape. A lot of the Big Ten teams probably weren't going to leave because they're happy where they're at, and a lot of them, for the most part, your bigger names that you have, Ohio State, Michigan State, they're all pretty happy, and they're all doing fairly well in the Big Ten just about every single year. So it's like anybody else after that, I don't think the Big Ten is going to be super crushed if they lose them. Even Wisconsin and Iowa, same thing. They do really well. So, the SEC, when they went out and they looked, they said, okay, what are some of the biggest name brands that we can go and get? And you look at Texas, Texas, same thing. Historically has always been great at football. They're still a big nationally recognized brand. And then same with Oklahoma. A lot of rich history there as far as football goes. They're a massive program. They've almost always been in the playoffs or at least been in contention here recently. Yeah. So yeah, the SEC went out and got the biggest fish they could. And I feel like the Big Ten has done the exact same thing. And like you pointed out earlier, they're not necessarily done. There's been a couple, well, maybe they're done, but not really, because like you said, they're trying to wait on Notre Dame to see what Notre Dame is going to do. There's even potential rumors that if they are able to get Notre Dame, maybe they try to bring in like a Stanford as an opponent for them because they've had a little bit of a rivalry with them here of late. I don't know if I would care for the Stanford one. I think if I'm the Big Ten, I go for the two biggest fish left out there. I go for Notre Dame, who's a great, good football program. They're not as relevant. They don't have the, kind of the big boy, as we'll put it, contention level with like the SEC and the Big Ten, as we've seen. And I would go after Oregon because after that, Washington, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Washington by no means, but they're, like you said, it's not the big sexy name. They're not turning a lot of heads in the football or the basketball world, to be 100% honest with you. And Stanford's been the same way here recently. I mean, you look at, two of the last, really good players to come out of, Stanford when they were ranked and decent was Andrew Luck and Christian McCaffrey. And that was, 7 and 10 years ago. So
I was going to say Andrew Luck retired like 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. So I mean, or 4 years ago, however long it was. But yeah, and he played 7 years on top of it, or 6 years on top of it. So yeah, I mean, well, and Stanford hasn't been a very good basketball program lately either. But Tony, the Big Ten did add Rutgers. Years back. So honestly, that brings the San Francisco crowd in, audience in. So anymore, other than if you're getting historically like blue blood, you're looking for audiences that you can captivate now, or that you have control over because hey, New York City, we've got it because we got Rutgers. Granted, but what college team is New York City? I mean, there are so many smaller ones, but New York City doesn't have a dominant. So if you just get your foot in the door, you're in the New York City market. You get Washington, you've got Seattle, you've got like the whole, basically, no offense to Washington State, but you've got basically the whole state.
Yeah.
You add Stanford, you get the Northern California audience, but honestly, I forgot what I was going to say, but it's early and I forgot to make coffee for myself this morning. But the sexy pick is, yes, Notre Dame, Oregon. Those are the two remaining ones that are even being talked about. Although Baylor could be a really good one because they performed really well in football and in basketball recently. So they're actually hitting both sides. Yeah. I would keep an eye out on Baylor as a potential suitor along with, let's say, Notre Dame and Washington and Oregon.
Yeah.
Those could be the 4. Plus, it gets the Big Ten foot into Texas.
Yeah. Now, I could definitely see that with the Baylor. I'm gonna throw another name out there because again, I like the interstate rivalries. I like a lot of the
Sure.
history. Can we kick out Maryland? Can we kick out Nebraska? Can we bring in Iowa State? Can we keep the Iowa Hawkeyes, the Iowa State Cyclones going? And again, kind of the same thing. They're not terrible at basketball. They're a decent football program.
Right.
They almost always give Iowa a run for their money, and Iowa's almost always very good in the Big Ten as far as football and basketball both go. So it's like, and don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Nebraska, but again, me being a Cowboys fan, I know what it's like to live in the 90s. I feel like that's where Huskers fans are still living currently. Like, I'm sorry, Nebraska, you haven't done much either since you joined in 2011. I'm going to bring in Iowa State. And Nebraska would fit back in the Big 12 just as easily. And I feel like Iowa State, you could easily do a flip, and it wouldn't be that big of a drastic change. And you would still have some really good rivalries. And Nebraska would go back to their old rivalries in the Big 12 anyway.
I think if Nebraska were booted out of the Big 10, they'd be an SEC team in a heartbeat.
I could see that.
I think the SEC was looking for historical and dominance, and Nebraska still, like you said, hasn't done much since they've joined the Big Ten. They're still historically a blue blood, just like it's a program that will bring notoriety. They're some of the most loyal fans, so they will travel. They will support their team no matter where they're at, what they're doing. The fact that Scott Frost hasn't lost his job yet kind of proves that to me, that they want him to succeed, so they're giving him every single chance, plus maybe a couple more, just to try to get him to succeed. And this year is projected that they're going to be a considerable amount better than they were last year. Dalton was saying last year, or their season last year, they lost something like 5 games by 7 or less points. And it was to Ohio State. Purdue beat them by 7. Like they were in almost every single game that they played, and they lost 5 or 6 of them by less than a touchdown.
Yeah, and I will say a lot of that because again, I've watched a lot of Nebraska games. I've watched, I try to watch every Big Ten game I can.
Sure,
a lot of that was due to their quarterback, Martinez.
Yeah.
He was not really the answer. He wasn't bad. I'm not going to take anything away from him. He was decent, but he was really bad. It seemed like he didn't know when to throw. It didn't seem like he knew where. He didn't have very good pocket presence. Now he would run, and that would usually work out for him pretty well, but it's like that can only get you so far. Eventually you are going to have to make some of those throws and, put the game on the line by throwing the ball. But yeah, I will give Nebraska credit. They did do pretty decent, the last couple years. And again, like you said, the fact that, Scott Frost even still has his job is really incredible. But again, it's not like they've gotten worse. They've been about the same, maybe getting a little bit better, which, like you said, a lot of that, loyalty that Nebraska has, I think, is starting to come through. And it does take a while to build a culture. I think that's what kind of surprises a lot of people, is they expect, like Lincoln Riley to USC. They're like, oh, they're immediately going to be, 8-9 win team, and they're, potentially going to be vying for the playoffs. Yes and no. It takes a while. Exactly. They might. It's very possible, especially being in the Pac-12. But, you got to work your way up to that. You got to build it. They have to put their program in. They have to put their plan, their
players
effort, their players. They have to put their whole system in, and that doesn't happen overnight. So.
Well, and I've always said on a new coach, you have to give them at least 4 years, because then by year 4, all of the players in the program are his.
Yes.
I don't care what you say. Well, so-and-so brought in better players before him. Doesn't matter. He's coming in to do his job. He's coming in to install his program. You've got to give him some time. If you're willing to spend millions of dollars to bring this guy in to win, you need to give him ample time to set up, like you said, the culture within that he sees is the direction that's going to win ball games. Because you can't, Tony, I would be shocked If I said, okay, you're going to do my job going forward from here, but I'm not, and if you don't perform as well as I do in the first 2 weeks, you're fired.
Yeah.
But you know what? You can only use this. I'm not going to help you because you're a smart, intelligent person. You have ideas of how you want to do it. But if you don't succeed with what's in place right now, you're fired. That's unfair. And
Yeah,
I'm not taking a moment of silence for these people that are making millions of dollars to do a job, but still you're paying $1 million because you expect to make more than those millions of dollars with wins. You got to give the guy time to get the wins. He may win. Lincoln Riley may win 12 games this year and they're in the CFP.
Yeah.
That very well may happen. And next year they could lose 6 games.
Exactly.
With all the same guys, but more people are being moved in that are his people that he's recruiting. You give him a couple more years and he might be winning a national championship his first year in the Big Ten.
Exactly. And kind of the same, it, like you said, if you don't let him build that culture, if you don't let him get established, because think about it, like you said, they could win 12 games this year and then next year they could lose 6. And a lot of that could be because, okay, even though they're getting ready to move to the Big Ten, they're going to potentially run through the same thing again. The Pac-12 is, okay, we have a year with his system. We have film with the players that he has at USC. Yep. Now we can study against that, and now we're going to get better, which happens literally every team, every sport. It's like once you've been there for a minute and once you have your formula, people are going to study that. Oh, this is what we're going to do to counter that. And then you may or may not be as successful as you have been.
The Wildcat was successful at one point.
Exactly. And now
then defenses adjusted to it, and it's a novelty now. So let's hit the halftime break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what we might think the college football landscape looks like coming out. You are listening to Big Ten Plus 4, hosted on Anchor and StreamYard.
Hey, this is Russ.
This is Kyle.
This is Michelle.
From the Infectious Groove Podcast. Join us every Monday for the most fun you can have with a music podcast. The Infectious Groove Podcast uses a positive and fun approach as we take time every week to share our jammy jams, then dig into a thought-provoking topic discussing all decades and genres of music. You can find the Infectious Groove Podcast on all major podcast platforms, or you can head to infectiousgroovepodcast.com to find us there and subscribe. We might have a controversial opinion here or there, but we always have fun with it.
Oh, I'm sure I'll say something dumb.
Subscribe to the Infectious Groove Podcast, part of the OddPodsMedia Network.
Hey, you there. We've got a question for you. Are you tired of clickbait stories and the loudest voices driving discussions in culture and entertainment?
If so, I'm Dylan.
I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey. And we host the podcast From the Middle. We're middle-class guys living in the middle of America, in the middle chapters of our lives with points of view somewhere in the middle.
We take a more reasonable and centrist approach in our discussions covering genres like comedy, culture, entertainment, and interviews with really interesting folks like business owners, comic creators, doctors, news anchors, New York Times best-selling illustrators, professional stand-up comics, and more. We really value a relaxed and conversational podcast, one that we hope is so fun and laid back, you'll forget you're not actually hanging out with us.
So search at From the Mid Pod, just like it sounds, or check us out everywhere you can find podcasts.
Okay, and also we stream every week on ASAP, All Sports All Plays Network. We love being on ASAP. I tell you what, Tony, it's one of those that we get to talk to great people that love sports, back and forth in the chat, comments on posts and stuff. So ASAP, give them a follow. You can find them on Twitter, any social media. The website is beyond my mind right now. Tony, do you remember it?
I do.
You've got it written down, don't you?
I do. I have it written down somewhere. I gotta kind of do the same thing. I'll find it. Go.
I think it's asapsportsnetwork.com, but I don't know that for sure.
If I remember right, that's what it is.
Okay.
Say if my yep, that's it. So it's asaptvnetwork.net, but if you type in ASAP Sports Network, it should automatically default you to the same website.
Yeah, the SEO takes it. If you just do ASAP All Sports All Plays Network or whatever in a Google search, it'll pull up the website too. So, but good stuff happening at ASAP. Good stuff happening at OddPods. We're members of both of those networks, and we're enjoying both of those. OddPods hosts our audio, and ASAP hosts our live streams. So we're really happy, and I think any of our listeners or / watchers would really enjoy both of those networks as well. So let's move to the third quarter. Sorry, I moved away from the microphone. So this is what I have written down. I said, what does this do for college football landscape? And there are two other questions. Actually, we kind of answered the one question last quarter. But what does college football look like in 5 years? So to tackle that first one, what do you think this does to college football's landscape going forward?
I think it gives it kind of like I heard somebody say the other day, it gives them kind of a booster shot. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a 7-year downtrend in viewership, in attendance, especially the fact that the last couple of years, there was COVID, there was the pandemic, and I think that just gave people more of a reason to be like, okay, I'm kind of done with this, and they left, or they just stopped watching entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I think it helps because, kind of like I mentioned, you look at the first 2 weeks in college football. Now, if you're a diehard football fan, or at least college football fan, there's going to be other games that you're like, oh no, those are going to be interesting. Like I'll watch those. But if you're a casual fan that's like, I only want to watch, I want the meat and potatoes of college football, this is a big thing. And I think overall, this is a big thing for the football landscape because, again, it makes things more interesting. And it helps coincide with that college football playoff expansion. Because think about it, one of the big questions and a lot of people that were opposed to the expansion was, oh, well, you just want to try to get one school from each conference basically in, and then whoever else after that. It's like, no, this makes your product better because, you look at how many times do you ever have a conference versus conference matchup? Not very often. Or if you do, it's like, oh, Alabama's going to beat up on, like Georgia Southern from the Sun Belt. Like, that's not even fair.
Right. Alabama and App State, that's not a fair matchup, but they're both really good in the conference that they play in,
Yes,
so
exactly.
it's not a fair matchup. It's a top matchup. If you look at, perennial, schools at the top of the conference, but it's not a fair matchup.
No, but it makes things more interesting. And like I said,
Sure it
I'm
does.
a proprietor of iron sharpens iron. Like if you have USC and Ohio State, both of them are going to get better. And especially with USC and UCLA coming in, because Pac-12 is a different style of football than the Big Ten plays. And we even saw it last year. Oregon upset Ohio State, and I don't think Ohio State was expecting that at all. And
Yeah.
it kind of surprised everybody. And, that was a fantastic game. And even look at Ohio State versus Utah shortly later in the playoffs. It was like, wow, this is a
Best bowl game of the season. That includes the CFP. That includes the national championship game. Ohio State and Utah was the best bowl game there was.
Exactly. And I think more moves like this makes those better bowl games and even makes better regular season games like that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. We talked last week about something that Rick Neuheisel proposed, and Dalton wasn't a fan of it being every game or every week of the season. But what Rick Neuheisel suggested was those top tier teams from each conference schedule out of conference games up to, and we kind of came to the agreement of until like maybe week 6 or 7. And then you get just into your conference, because you don't want to have Iowa going and playing Baylor in the middle of a season where they're playing really well. Baylor, pulls out a win, and then all of a sudden that just starts the downslide of Iowa.
Yeah.
because losses can snowball quickly. And he
Mhm.
says that's not to say they shouldn't play Baylor, but at least have some time for them to recover to where they're not going into the next to last week of the season really high, riding high, get knocked off by somebody, and then it just derails all that they've done. They say if you're going to lose, it's best to lose early
Yes.
so you can recover. So that halfway through it at least allows the team a chance to recover if they were going to do as such. Because good teams against good teams, it doesn't matter who it is, can win.
Oh yeah.
So you don't want Ohio State getting knocked off, let's say, by Oregon in week 9,
Mhm.
and that totally derails any chance they had. Whereas if they lose in week 1, Ohio State's in the CFP last year if they beat Michigan.
Yes.
And they still had a loss to Oregon. So like it allows recovery. But I think that does that with them being in the conference now. Granted, you may play USC the week before Michigan,
Mhm.
but that's just the way the schedule goes.
Yes.
Because the Big Ten controls that schedule.
Mhm.
It's not decided by Ohio State. So those matchups are going to be insane. Think
Mhm.
about this, going from, and this is not knocking on TCU or Baylor, but ABC has a national coverage game on Saturday night. Which one you watching, USC Ohio State or TCU Baylor? Which one
Oh,
gets you more excited?
Mhm.
Obviously, it's USC Ohio State because of the historic, whereas you're only getting the state of Texas interested in a TCU Baylor nationally televised game.
Yeah.
So it does bring up a lot more. It brings in more interest, I think. But honestly, I think the way it stacks up, this to me just tells me exactly what I need to know in the aspect of where we're headed in 5 years from this move. I think it stacks the Big Ten up very well with the SEC, because if you go from top to bottom, all 16 teams, there are just as many really good currently and blue blood teams historically in each of those conferences. The bottoms are about the same in the aspect of the bottoms are still kind of,
Yes.
but that's every conference. The bottom is kind of,
Yes.
but I think it matches them up very well with the SEC. I think they're on par with them to the aspect of they have the horses to be able to compete for a national championship. Now, it's been very lopsided recently. We've seen that. We know that. But my point is now you have more big guns to be able to do that. And I also think it proves to me what it's going to look like in about 5 years is there's going to be 2 major conferences. It's not going to be the NCAA anymore either. I think the NCAA will still exist, but it will be for these non-2 conferences, the super
Everybody else.
conferences. The super conferences are going to have one commissioner that runs the whole gambit of it. And I think those 2 conferences are going to have about 33 teams each.
Mhm.
And it's going to be very similar to like the National League, American League in baseball, in the aspect of those are their conferences. They play their whole season inside that conference. They figure out their champion of that conference and they move into the playoff.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
each conference gives their top 4 teams or whatever. And
Mhm.
then they match up that way. I think that's where we're headed with it because it only makes sense. The Big Ten kind of put a blockade to the SEC. They now go coast to coast with the exception of the Rocky Mountain area, which
Yes.
is why I think maybe Colorado may be of interest. Honestly, I would even go into the Mountain West Conference and look at UNLV.
Yeah. UNLV
Big-
or Boise State, because I mean,
or Boise State, because you're closing up that gap in the Rocky Mountain area to where there is a blockade then.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I don't think the SEC is going to try to go too much north unless they get Notre Dame. I think they're very interested in Notre Dame.
Oh yeah.
But I think if Notre Dame is going to join a conference, it's going to be the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So I think we're heading towards where the NCAA, and you know what? The NCAA dug their grave on this. They could have very easily, I think NIL pushes into this because all of a sudden these players can get tons of money while they're playing in college. Well, which college gives me the best chance to make money?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a money grab in the aspect of they're getting the colleges and the universities that they think that will make them more money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's an added bonus that USC and UCLA have a connection to the Big Ten, but they're in LA.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
LA was the goal there. And so the fact that they got both of those teams, wow, that's awesome.
And I think part of it is say the Big Ten only goes after, say, USC, because if they look at it only from a football perspective, okay, and let's say the Pac-12 is able to bring in like a Boise State or bring in like a Colorado State to, subsidize for that. If you're the Big Ten, why do you want a potential rival literally right next door to you in LA? Like, oh, well, I can, like you said, with the NIL, oh, I can go to school. I can go to school at UCLA now. I'll be in the Pac-12. I'll make, potentially good money, because you have to think, if this hadn't happened, the Pac-12 was probably going to be like, okay, we're probably going to need more money. Otherwise, our teams are going to leave in the future. It's just the teams ended up, abandoning ship long before that could even happen, which now the Pac-12 is scrambling to get done, But if you're the Big Ten and you don't get at least UCLA, okay, well, now I can go to the Pac-12. I can still be relevant. I can still earn a lot of money, and I don't have to worry about potentially going into the cold. And I know a couple people talked about that. It's like, the Midwest isn't terrible in the fall. Like October, it's still good. Now November, depending on where you go,
as we think about Ohio State, Michigan last year when they were playing in the snow.
Yeah, in the snow. Can you picture how well USC is going to do if they go up to Wisconsin like the second week in November or like the first week in November? How well you think that's going to go?
What about Minnesota? They play in an open air stadium now.
Ooh, that would be ugly for USC.
It's hot in Minnesota when it hits 80.
Yes,
like people complain in Minnesota that it's hot because it's 80.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, I don't think the Big Ten was going to fight itself. It's like we need to get the biggest brands. We need to go get the LA teams. We need to get both of them, so that way, like you said, they control that market. To me, then you kind of control a majority of California, even if you don't get Stanford, because again, we kind of talked about a little earlier. The Big 12 is rumored they're going to go after both Arizona schools. They're going to go after Utah, and they're going to go after Colorado. Stanford could very easily kind of get absorbed in there. The Big 12 kind of expand out to like the Southwest Conference then, and easily absorb Stanford. But I think with the Big 10 getting the LA market, you get about 70% of California then with that. So you've got a pretty big footprint. Now on the SEC side, I'm just waiting to see the news. Again, their TV rights are good till 2036. So I don't know if some of these teams are willing to pay out, but they might, because the SEC is going to get a ton of money. I'm waiting for Clemson. I'm waiting for Florida State. And Clemson, Florida State, I think North Carolina, and I've seen a toss-up between Virginia and somebody else I can't think of off the top of my head. But if Miami. If I'm the SEC, I would go, if you want a true blue blood, historically good programs in both, I would go get Clemson. I would get Miami. And for your basketball, because really, if you look at SEC basketball, you've got Kentucky, you've got Tennessee, Alabama's kind of thrown in there a little bit. They're not really a big basketball powerhouse like Kentucky and Tennessee are. But if you want true blue blood, basketball programs, and to keep a big rivalry, you go after UNC and you go after Duke.
I don't think there's any chance that Duke and North Carolina go to different conferences. I think as big of a rivalry they are, as rivals as they are, they're hand in hand on where they're going. Yes. You're not gonna see UNC go, see ya, Duke. We're going to, we're a surprise. We're going to the Big 12. They're both going wherever together. I don't know that one could exist without the other in the same conference. Honestly, I think the world would explode. But honestly, I think, and this is clearly just my thought on this. If the Big Ten really wants to fire a shot across the bow, they go and get Clemson.
Yeah.
And then that tells the SEC we're not playing games with this.
Mm-hmm.
We're in this for the long haul. We're going to be valid. Clemson's rival is in the SEC, so it would make sense for them to go there, but they're not opposed to not being in the same conference as their rival.
Oh, yeah.
So like they could easily jump. It's just a matter of, does the Big Ten see the buyout from the TV deal? Because that could be hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't know exactly what the buyout is, but it could be a lot of money. Is it worth getting Clemson to come to the Big Ten and we pay the buyout? But I think it would be a big shot across the SEC bow if they were to get Clemson, because I think, honestly, I don't think there's many people thinking that Clemson's going anywhere but the SEC.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the first place I see them going, and I think even though the Big Ten has broke the geographical barrier, as we'll call it, I don't see the SEC doing as much. Like we see them expand a little bit more west, which I could kind of see them. They
already had Texas A&M, so it wasn't that much.
Had Texas, yeah. So you're only moving over a super tiny bit with Texas. So to me, I could just see the SEC kind of moving up a little bit more, getting the Carolinas. Go ahead and absorb the Florida teams. So I could very easily see that. But kind of like what we said with the two super conferences. Where do some of these other teams go then? Where does the Pittsburghs go? If Florida State doesn't go in the SEC, where do they go? Do they kind of join do they join UCF? And they're like, okay, well, we'll go in the Big 12. And that gives the Big 12 another footprint in Florida, basically. Because if you think about it, out of all three of those, the only one that's been, Florida State and UCF have been relevant recently in football. But historically, like we've talked about with, the SEC majority wanting blue blood programs, you go after Miami. But yeah, I think a lot of the SEC they'll stay a little bit more true to like the actual geographic barrier. And then I think the Big Ten will probably just take everything else.
I could see it being kind of a yin yang where the SEC starts up on the northeast coast and works its way down, wraps around Florida and into Texas, maybe all the way into Arizona even.
Yeah. And
then the Big Ten takes it from LA all the way up the West Coast and across over to New York City. Mm-hmm. Now, the only outlier that I really, really see there is Syracuse.
Yes.
They have the back and forth of which way to go, because Syracuse is not on the coast.
No.
But they would fit, I think, probably more with the style of teams and programs that would be considered in the SEC super conference there.
Yeah.
So it would be one of those that may, and I think UConn goes SEC, probably, maybe the Big Ten. I don't know. Those are kind of the New England area is kind of a toss up of which way it would go, because there's no really historically blue blood football programs up there other than maybe Pitt, but that's not on the coast either.
Yeah.
I see Pitt going to the Big Ten, honestly.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, if I'm UConn, I wouldn't really worry about the football, because again, football is not what you're known for. Like, and if I remember, they're not in the Big East for college basketball, are they?
Yes, they just moved back. They left the AAC and went to the Big East.
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm UConn, the Big East, at least for basketball right now, isn't going to go anywhere, because the Big East in basketball is still a legitimate conference.
Mm-hmm. So it's for sure, it's part of the Power Six. There's a Power Six in basketball.
Yeah, so basketball, I don't really see them worrying. If I'm UConn, honestly, I would be one of those schools. Be the new Notre Dame, be the new BYU. Just be independent. Make your own schedule and do what you want to do. But basketball, just stay in the Big East.
Do you see anything saying like I just went on the record saying it's going to be those two in football, those two conferences, but that also takes the basketball with it.
Yeah.
So does the Big East then stay on the outside fringes of major college sports because they don't play football?
I think so, because I don't think it's anything that they could do about it, because I mean, heck, we saw the Big East fold in college football, and
Right.
and that, and essentially that's what ended up becoming part of the ACC and the Big 12 was a lot of those those Big East teams. And it, the more I look at it, the more I think about it, I think that may end up being the case. But I think with basketball, it leaves it a little bit more interesting, because we've seen schools that it's like, okay, well, we're not as good at football anyway. So, like, look at Wichita Falls. Wichita Falls doesn't even have a football program. They only have a basketball program.
Yeah.
And kind of the same with UConn. I could very easily see UConn be like, we can have a football program. We'll kind of do our own schedule, or they may join one of kind of the more minor conferences, like, well, hey, for football, we'll be a part of like I could very easily see them joining the AAC for football, like join the AAC, and then basketball, you're still part of the Big East.
Now, do you think because I firmly believe football, especially at least, is heading towards this super conference where it's not run by the NCAA.
Yeah.
Do you think the NCAA is going to be nice enough or want to play when it comes to these conferences or these teams that play football, but they're not dominant, or the ones that play basketball? Are they, it's such a toss up, because like Boston College, yeah, great. They're decent at football once in a while. They're garbage when it comes to basketball. Are they gonna still play basketball in these conferences, or are they gonna allow these colleges, these conferences or these schools to maybe drop back into a different conference that fits to them basketball wise? Like, can you see it being to where football is what we're talking about with the major college stuff, and the rest of the college sports stay in the NCAA?
I think so. And I think if you're the NCAA, that's the smart thing to do. If you look at, football is your big money grabber, as far as, you go out, you get the biggest programs you can, you get the most money you can through the biggest marquee matchups that you can. Whereas, you look at it from a basketball perspective, you still have a bit of a downtrend, but college basketball is almost always interesting. There's almost always
for sure.
There's a lot of diehard support, because they have a whole entire month for it. Like, you have March Madness, because anything could potentially happen. So if I'm the NCAA, I would do that, because again, you're going to get the most bang for your buck that way. Let football do its thing. You're going to get a ton of money from it. Keep basketball kind of the way it is, because like you said, there's a Power 6, and it's not like any of them are bad.
Right.
Now, I do think a couple of those are probably going to go away. I think it would probably be like a Power 4 or a Power 5 because of the Pac-12 going away, because it's kind of the same. It's like, oh, well, there's what used to be the Pac-12 in football, and now there's the Pac-12 of, like you said, like Fresno State, San Diego State, Washington State, Oregon State. It's like, oh, that's...
Well, think about this, Tony. In my lifetime, I've seen St. Joe's be a 1 seed. I've seen Wichita State be a 1 seed. We've seen Gonzaga go undefeated until the national title game. Yeah. Those teams don't play football on the major stage, but yet if the NCAA doesn't, I mean, these schools will suffer. Now, you may have a Wichita State three-peat, because all these other teams that move with the football, if they aren't allowed to play in the NCAA for basketball and be in March Madness, you may have Wichita State winning three in a row. But who's gonna care if that happens?
Exactly.
March Madness will take a huge hit if the NCAA and this new conglomeration of whatever it is that college football is going to be, it will ruin basketball if they don't work together to make something happen, because the NCAA, and let's call the NCAA what they are, is they're money grabbers.
Oh yeah.
So if they're going to lose billions for basketball because they're too stubborn to do something, which they've shown they're too stubborn to do stuff on lots of things,
Yep.
then they deserve to just dissolve into nothingness.
Oh yeah. And like you said, if they're stubborn enough to, then they deserve. And like you said, I think they will. I think, or they might be proactive. I think I think once we see 2024, 2025, when all this stuff finally kicks in, I think then the NCAA is going to realize, oh crap, we need to do something. We need to do something right now to make the, again, to not dissolve into nothingness.
Yeah, well, but they've certainly proven that they're pretty stubborn, and they choose to ignore things that are apparent that are coming. They go to Congress more than once to ask for help with NIL, and they're like, what is it you guys are doing in your offices in Indianapolis?
Literally.
Because you guys saw this coming 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Doesn't matter how long ago. It doesn't matter if it was last week. You don't come to us and ask us to do your job. We've got bigger fish to fry than worry about whether the NCAA loses out on a few million or even $1 billion because they didn't do anything to corral the NIL before it started.
Yeah.
And so they are getting their just desserts, as people like to say, because they made their bed. They need to lie in the bed that they made because they saw this coming and they did nothing about it. And I think they should have learned from this, and they should be starting to put in motion what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because my thought of what's happening, what will happen in 5 years, is not my complete original thought. I've heard others talking about it. So it's not like I'm just pulling stuff out and going, oh, this could happen. This is where I think. I've listened to people and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And then I've kind of made my own thoughts. If I'm figuring this out, the NCAA, who makes billions of dollars, should already have known about this.
Yes.
They should have things in motion. And that's kind of where we're headed, where I'm headed in my headlines. So let's go to the fourth quarter. You ready?
Yep, let's do it.
I tell you, I'm not hearing the whistles on Firefox. I'm not happy, but I have a Rodecaster Pro, and it will not run through Chrome for some reason right now. I can't get my work handles my Chrome, like control admins my Chrome, because we run through work through Google.
Yeah.
So I can't change the settings. So I can't get my Rodecaster to work through Chrome on StreamYard. So I got to go through Firefox so I can have my Rodecaster work, and I can't hear the tweets.
Are you able to get Microsoft Edge?
Yeah, I do. I use that for work.
Okay.
So I use that for my grading portion of it.
I say, because I use Edge and I haven't had any issues with it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, maybe I saw Firefox there when I was trying to figure out what was wrong with it, and so I fired it up and it worked, so I'm happy with that. But I may have to try to Edge now. But yeah, this is the fourth quarter, which we do our headlines. We scour the headlines, and we choose which one we think best fits, and we want to talk about. Normally I kick it off, Tony, but you know what? Guests need to go first, because that's the proper way to treat guests. So do you have a name for your newspaper, or is this just Tony's Talk?
I'm gonna call it Tony's Tribune, because I tried to keep with the keep with the newspaper theme.
Yeah, Tony's Tribune. All right.
Yeah, so while we've talked about having two super conferences, I think up until then, which I think that's still about 10 years away, I'm going to say, I think there's going to be a Power 3 in college football, and I think the Big 12 is going to end up absorbing a lot of the Pac-12 teams that say don't get into either the Big 10 or the SEC. The Big 12 is reported to add up to 6 of the Pac-12 teams in their conference. And again, this is, say hypothetically, the Big 10 just says they're done. They don't continue to expand. They don't add Oregon and Washington. The report is that Arizona State, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington will all be added into the Big 12. Geographically, like I said, that kind of makes sense. I could kind of see it being like a little bit of a triangle almost that overlaps. You have the Big 10 cover the Northwest into the Midwest. You have the SEC cover that, and then the Big 12 cover everything else. I could very easily see them and the Pac-12 kind of merging, and I think the big reason is because the Pac-12 has, over a 100-year sport history. The Big 12, not as much, but again, I think this is one of those, the Big 12 needs to go ahead and say, hey, we need to keep ourselves as relevant as possible. We need to bring in the biggest names, bring in the best competition. And again, what better way than go ahead and be kind of the catch-all conference for everybody else and give these teams a chance to say, hey, the Big 10 didn't want us, the SEC didn't want us, let us show our stuff now in the Big 12.
So you're seeing a Venn diagram is
Yes.
what you're seeing, basically what the college football landscape will look like, because you'll have those overlapping geographical areas, I guess, that will overlap. And especially if, like, what we talked about in the third was if the SEC climbs the East Coast and gets, let's say, Boston College, you're going to have New York and Boston, or Boston's north of New York. So you'd have those two overlapping kind of the same way, maybe in the Rocky Mountain area. One conference may get Colorado State and the other one gets Colorado. They both may get both the Colorado teams. Don't know. Yeah. But yeah, you could have that over, or Colorado State goes to that third one, that you're talking about. So yeah, I could see this being a potential.
Well, and think about it.
3 conferences.
Yeah, and think about it. The Big 10's kind of going down into Southern California. Well, then the Big 12 would be coming up into, Utah and, potentially even farther. So yeah, you're going to have kind of the same thing. Big 10's down this way, but, Big 12 is up. So yeah, like I said, I think it'll go to 3 before it goes to 2, because I don't see the ACC and the Big 12 going away that easily. But like we kind of talked about, I see the ACC getting absorbed more by the SEC, which I did a little bit of fact checking and history checking. Apparently there was a super conference. It was just the Southern Conference back in like the 1920s, had Maryland, had Clemson, Bama, LSU, like a few of these teams that we've known. And yeah, it was a lot of the ACC teams and the SEC teams were basically already a part of one big super conference to start with back in literally 100 years ago.
Literally. Wow.
Yep.
You can't say like 100 years ago. It literally was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move to the Sam Sentinel. Yeah, that's it's my turn now, Tony. We're obviously staying on the same track. To kind of go further, a little further, is the I've seen reports that Kansas is very close. And then I talked to Dalton, and he said he hadn't seen anything yet, but there was like maybe some rumor that it could happen, that Kansas is looking to move to the Big Ten. That would be a huge move in the aspect of that is gutting even more of the Big 12 if that were to happen. I could see, like I mentioned earlier, I could see Baylor moving in to the Big 10, because then that would expand Big 10's reach into Texas. I honestly can see this being a battle over those big names to try to get as many big names into your, doesn't matter basketball or football, because they both produce money out the wazoo. But they could pull these big teams from, or the remaining big teams from the conferences that are being basically decimated. I don't see a way that will allow the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to exist after all the dust settles. But that's just my thought. The ACC has a little bit more going for them just because they still have their TV deal that's in place for another decade plus. So I think they'll be the last conference to fall before, in my mind, the two conferences take over. But what I wanted to get to, and I know that was a long-winded way to get to where I was headed, I want to talk about the death of the Rose Bowl, because essentially USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten will kill the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all. It still carries the mystique, at least for now, and they're in negotiations to be part of the CFP year in and year out, rather than just on the 4-year rotation or whatever rotation that they've got going on now. It might be 6 now, because I think it's the New Year's 6, and I think each one gets a chance to host the national title, or be the featured game. I guess in Indianapolis there was no bowl game that hosted the national championship game. But my point is on this is, historically it's always been a Big 10, Pac-8, 10, or Pac-12 champion game until we got to the CFP, the BCS and CFP. It is still one of those that I can remember the one time I was alive that Purdue made the Rose Bowl, and it was the greatest bowl game I have watched ever, because my team was in that bowl game that I grew up seeing as the end all be all for a Big Ten championship. I wasn't naive to think that Purdue was going to win a national title, but I always had hope that they were going to the Rose Bowl. And the Rose Bowl will still exist. I don't think it's going away, but the mystique and the historic value that is carried for over 100 years, or running up on 100 years at least, but I'm pretty positive it's over 100 years old. It's gone. Even if the Pac-12 stuck around, USC and Washington in the Rose Bowl just doesn't carry the weight that Ohio State against Oregon, or against UCLA, or against USC, or even Wisconsin against any of those teams carries. It just doesn't. And it breaks my heart in the aspect of the NCAA allowed this to happen. There are ways, again, this stuff's coming. You want to keep your history too, because history matters to so many programs in this country. And that means to millions of people, history matters. So in order to keep that added value of the Rose Bowl, it is a little heartbreaking that USC and UCLA essentially killed it by moving to the Big Ten. I think it's going to still be for the good. Maybe. Nothing's going to be the same, but that's the way life is. Life changes in life, and things don't stay the same forever. But there are some things that you should really, really, really try to keep tried and true and historic, and keep it there for value. And I'm a little sad this morning or this week because of that happening. But you know what? Things change, and they're not always the way you want them to change. You just hope it's for the best. So that is the Sam Sentinel. Oh, what an episode. We ran a little longer than normal, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
But what a great show. I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to talk real quick to the listeners. If you want to catch us on social media, you can go to Big 10 Plus 4 on Facebook. We are Big 10 Plus 4, but Tony, you have to spell out plus. Don't put the plus sign in on Twitter. Okay. They won't let you have the plus sign on Twitter. You have to do So find us at Twitter. Go to oddpodsmedia.com and find the whole Oddpods Media family of shows there along with us. Find us streamed on ASAP Network every Friday, normally at 8:45. This week, I think it'll be 8:30 on Friday. Okay. Because we did run a little long, and I don't want to interfere with the morning show that comes on at 10 every week. So we may bump up a little sooner. So Tony, thanks so much for joining us this week. And that's all from us at Big 10 Plus 4. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Maybe. There it is.